It started with a scratching, not loud, not violent, just deliberate, as if something was trying not to be heard. The Rupp family moved into their new home in Bangor, Maine, in the fall of 2003. It wasn't a mansion, but for Scott and Melissa Rupp, it was everything they'd worked for. A 3-bedroom colonial with ivy-covered bricks, a swing set in the backyard, and just enough creaks in the floor to feel old-fashioned rather than haunted. Their son, Caleb, was 6. Quiet, pale kid with a love for drawing monsters. Melissa said he had an overactive imagination, but even she couldn't explain the things Caleb started saying within the first week of moving in. "There's a boy in the wall," he told her, matter of fact, one rainy afternoon. She'd laughed at first. "Is he nice?" "He watches me sleep," Caleb said. "The thing about parenting is, you lie to yourself. You tell yourself kids say weird things. You tell yourself it's just a phase." Melissa tucked him in that night and chalked it up to the stress of moving. That was the night she heard it for the first time. A soft, slow scratching in the wall just above her headboard. Then a pause. Then 3 knocks. Tap, 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 and silence. She woke Scott, but by the time he listened, it was gone. "Mice," he said. "Maybe raccoons. They call someone." But the scratching came back. Always between 1 and 3 a.m. Always in the same rhythm. And sometimes, it moved. From the bedroom wall to the hallway. From the hallway to Caleb's room. One night, Melissa woke to Caleb screaming. She sprinted down the hall and found him in the corner, crying, pointing at the wall. "He was inside," Caleb sobbed. "He was looking at me." Scott insisted it was sleep paralysis. Night terrors. They took Caleb to a pediatric therapist, who confirmed it was probably anxiety from the move. The therapist didn't live in the Rupp house. By mid-November, things escalated. One morning, Melissa found a drawing tucked under her pillow. Not Caleb's usual crayon monsters. This was something else. It was a pencil sketch, detailed, obsessive, of a small boy crouched in darkness, his eyes too big for his face, his mouth sewn shut. "What the hell is this?" she asked Caleb. "I didn't draw it," he said quietly. He did. The same day, Melissa noticed something strange in the living room. A small draft of air, coming from behind the grandfather clock they'd inherited from the previous owners. She moved it aside and found a narrow wooden panel with rusty hinges. It wasn't in the house's blueprints. Behind it, a crawl space, about 4 feet wide. She shined a flashlight in and nearly dropped it. Scratched into the wood, over and over, were the words, "Let me out." Scott still wasn't convinced, until he set up the baby monitor. He put one in Caleb's room and another in the crawl space. That night, around 2:13 a.m., he heard breathing. Not Caleb's. This was low, raspy, animalistic, and then words, whispered, just above a growl. "Don't tell them." They called the police. The crawl space was empty. No evidence of squatters, no animals, no secret passageways. They sealed it shut, put bolts on every vent, new locks on the doors. They thought it was over. Then, on December 3rd, the scratching returned. Only now, it came from inside the walls on both floors. That same week, Caleb disappeared. He was there, and then he wasn't. No broken window, no open door, no footprints, just a cold draft, and the silence. December 3rd, 2003, began like any other frigid morning in Bangor. Melissa Rupp awoke to the smell of coffee. Scott was already downstairs. She called for Caleb. No answer. She checked his room. The bed was made, his toys untouched, the window still locked from the inside, and Caleb was gone. At first, they thought maybe he'd wandered outside, but there were no footprints in the snow. No signs of forced entry. Every door was locked. Every window shut tight. The only thing they found was his drawing pad, sitting on his nightstand. The last page had been freshly torn out. The Bangor police arrived within 30 minutes. No Amber Alert. Not yet. The officers did a standard sweep. No evidence of abduction, no signs of struggle. One officer, Detective Laura Meeks, noticed the strange placement of furniture in the living room, the grandfather clock, the sealed crawlspace behind it. "You sure this was always here?" she asked Scott. Scott explained. The baby monitor, the whispers, the breathing. She didn't laugh. Instead, she asked to listen to the recording. But the file was gone. Scott swore he hadn't deleted it. The SD card was corrupted. No audio, just static. Detective Meeks stayed longer than her shift. Something about the house unnerved her. A week passed. No word. No clues. Melissa stopped sleeping. She started hearing things, Caleb's laugh, late at night. The soft shuffle of bare feet across the floor. She'd rush into the hallway, only to find it empty. But the worst part was the scratching. It was louder now. Faster. Less like scratching and more like clawing. Desperate, Melissa turned to the previous owners of the home, a retired couple named Harold and Janine Kessler. They lived 2 towns over, in Ellsworth. Harold refused to talk. But Janine, in hushed tones, told her something chilling. "We only stayed 3 years. It started with our cat. Then my nephew. He said there was someone in the walls. Harold said he was lying. But I knew. I felt it. That thing watches." Melissa begged her for more, but Janine only shook her head. "The boy in the wall doesn't want to be found. He wants to stay." Meanwhile, Detective Meeks began digging into the house's records. What she found sent her down a rabbit hole of missing persons reports. In 1976, a 9-year-old boy named Joshua Thorne vanished from a house just 3 blocks away. His case was never solved. But what caught Meeks' attention was a note written in his case file by the original investigator. Pryor complained of voices in wall. Parents believed intruder living inside house. No evidence found. Sound familiar? Meeks started cross-referencing. Between 1973 and 1998, within a 10-block radius, 5 children had gone missing. No connections. No suspects. No explanations. Until now. Back at the Rupp house, Scott heard the scratching again, this time coming from the basement. He followed the sound with a flashlight and a crowbar. In the far corner, behind an old oil drum, was a wooden panel. Not in the blueprints. Screwed in from the outside. He pried it open. Inside, darkness. Dust. And bones. Tiny bones. They weren't sure how old they were. They weren't sure how many bodies. But Melissa knew one thing the moment she saw them: none of them were Caleb. Still, she collapsed. The discovery hit local news. Forensics moved in. Police sealed the basement. But it didn't stop the house. That night, Scott found a new drawing on the kitchen table. Not Caleb's. Pencil again. Too detailed for a 6-year-old. It showed a small boy, eyes blacked out, curled up inside the wall. But behind him, something else. Something bigger. Hulking. With elongated limbs and jagged teeth. A crude caption was scribbled underneath. "He makes me stay." Melissa wanted to burn the house down. Scott convinced her to stay one more night at a hotel while police worked. Maybe Caleb was still nearby. Maybe he was still alive. But Melissa had already decided. She wouldn't survive another sunrise in that house. Then her phone rang. It was 3:12 a.m. No caller ID. Just silence. And then, in Caleb's voice, "Mommy, I'm cold." The call ended. She screamed. Called the police. Traced the number. It came from the Rupp's landline. But the house was supposed to be empty. Detective Meeks responded first. She and 2 officers entered the house at 3:38 a.m. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No prints. No movement. Until they reached Caleb's room. The walls were different. Someone or something had peeled back the wallpaper. Underneath, carved into the drywall, were hundreds of tiny messages. Some scratched with nails. Some drawn in blood. All of them said the same thing. "Let me out. We always assume haunted houses are empty. What if they're not haunted? What if they're occupied?" Detective Laura Meeks, Incident Report, December 4th, 2003. Melissa and Scott refused to go back. After the call from the house, Caleb's voice whispering, "I'm cold," they checked into a long-term hotel surrounded by officers and family support. Melissa was sedated. Scott was nearly catatonic. But Detective Meeks, she couldn't sleep. There was something alive in that house. Not a ghost. Not a demon. Something worse. She returned the next day with a search warrant and a structural engineer. The blueprints didn't match the layout. There were extra spaces, hidden voids between walls, narrow shafts that shouldn't exist. But the engineer, a man named Dorian Trent, said something that sent shivers down her spine. Someone modified this place. Someone with knowledge. This wasn't a mistake. These spaces were built to be lived in. The attic had been overlooked. No dust, no insulation, just wood. Cleaned, disturbed recently. In the corner, a small, grimy mattress. A collection of children's shoes. Candy wrappers. A stack of drawings. All of them were of Caleb. Meeks was stunned. Whoever had been living in the walls, he'd been watching the Rupp family the entire time. She checked behind the walls again, tracing the crawl space beyond the sealed panel. This time, she found something new. A peephole drilled from inside the walls directly into Caleb's room. But there was more. Scratched into the wood next to the peephole was a phrase. "I was here before him. And before them. And before you." Meeks called in the K9 unit. That's when things got terrifying. The dogs refused to enter the crawl space. They whined, growled, backed away. One of them bolted. So Meeks went in herself. She crawled 20 feet through darkness before her flashlight caught something. A face. Or what looked like one painted crudely on the inside of a cardboard box. Holes where the eyes should be. A child's shirt stapled to the front like skin. She turned the box over and screamed. Inside were photos. Dozens of them. Black and white Polaroids. Children. Crying. Sleeping. Screaming. And in the corner of every photo, a shadow. A tall, thin man. Sometimes crouched. Sometimes hanging from the ceiling. Always watching. The final photo was of Caleb. It had been taken 2 days before he went missing. Meeks handed the evidence over to the FBI. And that's when the real story began to unravel. The fingerprints on the photos were degraded, but one partial print matched a name in a very old file. Daniel Carver, born 1958, declared dead in 1972 after a house fire in Bangor. Age at death, 14. Except there was no body recovered. Only partial remains believed to be his. The house that burned? It was on the same block as the Rupp residence. Meeks dug deeper. Daniel Carver had been institutionalized for psychiatric evaluation at age 9 after a series of brutal incidents at his elementary school. He told counselors there was a thing in his attic that made him hurt people, that it lived behind the walls, that it whispered secrets to him, told him how to disappear. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and extreme dissociation. But one thing never changed, his story about the thing in the walls. When his house burned down in 1972, everyone assumed it was Daniel. But what if it wasn't? What if Daniel never died? What if he simply moved into the walls of a new house and kept moving? Back at the hotel, Melissa received another call. No number. This time, it wasn't Caleb. It was a man's voice. He belongs to the house now. Click. She collapsed. Scott tried to trace the call. But again, it came from the Rupp landline. The police set up thermal imaging around the house. At 3:14 a.m., they picked up heat signatures inside the walls. A small shape child-sized in the basement. And something else. Something larger moving toward it. The signal blinked out. They rushed in. No sign of Caleb. But the sealed panel behind the oil drum? It had been opened again. From the inside. On the wall, scratched in fresh wood. "He doesn't like you watching." Everyone focused on the man in the walls. No one asked who was behind him. Anonymous tip, Bangor PD hotline, December 6, 2003. The thermal scan from the night before haunted Detective Meeks. 2 figures. One smaller, Caleb. One larger, still unidentified. She replayed the footage again and again. The larger figure didn't move like a person. It was too slow. Too fluid. Like it was slithering, dragging itself through the walls. The signature vanished as quickly as it appeared. But not before it turned directly toward the thermal camera and stared. That morning, a package was delivered to the Bangor Police Department. No return address. Inside was a cassette tape. No label. Just a note. Play it when you're alone. Meeks did just that. The audio was grainy, distorted, but what it contained chilled her to her core. It was a child's voice, Caleb's. He was crying, whispering, asking for his mom. Then came another voice, deeper, inhuman. "He'll never leave. He was promised to me." Then silence. Except, at the very end, barely audible beneath the static, Meeks could hear a third voice. One she hadn't heard before. High-pitched. Raspy. Almost female. "Daniel Eyes?" Meeks froze the tape. Rewound. Played it again. "Daniel Eyes?" There was someone else. The FBI reanalyzed the fingerprints from the attic and basement. One belonged to Daniel Carver. But the other was a match to Emily Reese, a girl who went missing in Bangor in 1981 at age 13. Her case was closed. Presumed dead. But now? It looked like she'd never left. the theory shifted. Maybe Daniel wasn't working alone. Maybe he wasn't the one in control. Maybe someone or something else was down there with him. At 2:57 a.m. that night, Meeks returned to the house with a forensic team and 2 thermal scanners. She brought a cadaver dog, a listening device, and 2 backup officers. They weren't prepared for what they found. The dog refused to enter Caleb's bedroom. Its ears dropped. It urinated on the floor. Then it turned and ran. The walls were cold, except for one spot. Behind Caleb's closet, there was a heat source human-sized. They drilled in carefully, removed the panel. What they found wasn't a crawl space. It was a room, 6 feet by 6 feet, covered in black paint. Symbols scratched into the walls. Blood, feathers, old bones, rotten food, and at the center an old child's mattress soaked in urine and bile. But the worst part? The walls were lined with drawings. Not on paper, on skin. Some kind of preserved human hide, painted over, tacked to the walls. Each one depicted Caleb, sleeping, crying, sitting at dinner. Someone had been living there, watching, documenting his life. But there was something else. A second set of drawings, rougher, angrier, hidden beneath the mattress. These ones showed Daniel, bound, gagged, bleeding, and in front of him, a woman, hair matted, face obscured. Emily? It didn't make sense. If Daniel was the monster in the walls, then who was tormenting him? The house was evacuated. Again, Melissa and Scott were moved to a secure, undisclosed location. But the next night, Melissa received another call. Only this time, it wasn't Caleb. It wasn't Daniel. It was the girl. "He lied to you," the voice whispered. "He took me too. But I got out. You won't." Melissa screamed. She begged the voice to tell her where Caleb was. There was a pause. "He's in the dark. But not alone." Click. Meeks reviewed the original Carver case. She dug up old psychiatric reports from the 1960s. She found something that had never been public. Daniel Carver, at age 9, had claimed he didn't discover the thing in the wall. He was born there. His mother had hidden him during a custody dispute, kept him in the attic, fed him scraps, never let him outside. He lived in the walls until age 6. Then one day, the neighbors heard screams. Daniel's mother had been found in the basement, mutilated. No one could prove Daniel did it. He was just a kid. But he was found locked in the crawl space, eyes wide, covered in blood. And what he told the police that night: "She made me do it." The girl in the dark. Now, in 2003, that girl had a name. Emily Reese. And she had never left the house. She wasn't a victim. She was the architect. He was the monster they blamed. But every monster has a master. Excerpt from Emily Reese's psychiatric file, 1980. Detective Laura Meeks hadn't slept in 36 hours. She was deep inside the archives of Eastern Maine Psychiatric Hospital, surrounded by case files so old they crumbled at the edges. She needed answers not just about Daniel Carver, but now Emily Reese. The girl who was never found. The one who, according to new prints and chilling phone calls, never left the house. Emily had vanished in the fall of 1981. Her parents, both teachers, had left for a weekend conference in Portland. When they came home, Emily was gone. No forced entry. No sign of a struggle. Just her diary left open on her desk. The final entry? "He watches me from the wall. He tells me secrets. He says I can be like him." The case went cold. No suspects. No leads. Until now. Meeks flipped through her psychiatric file. Emily had been institutionalized at age 11 for extreme dissociation and violent hallucinations. She claimed she could leave her skin and crawl through dreams. The staff dismissed it as fantasy. But one note stood out. Dated September 3, 1980. Emily has formed an intense bond with another patient, Daniel Carver. What? Meeks checked the intake logs. Daniel had been transferred to the same facility a year after the fire that supposedly killed him. He wasn't dead. He was hidden. The state had staged his death for safety reasons, citing a high risk to the community. And someone within the hospital, possibly a doctor, believed he needed isolation, not treatment. Emily and Daniel met in a shared therapy session. According to notes, they became inseparable. They created a fantasy world together. They called it the Hollow, a place between walls, a place where people disappeared. Emily once told her therapist, "In the Hollow, I'm not small anymore. I'm in control. He obeys me there." 1 month later, she was released to her parents on probation. 2 weeks after that, she vanished. Back at the Rupp house, FBI agents drilled into a newly discovered passage behind the kitchen pantry. The dogs had picked up a scent again. This tunnel had been sealed with cement, then sheetrocked over. When they finally broke through, they found stairs. Old, rotten, leading downward. But the house didn't have a basement that deep. At the bottom, a metal door. Welded shut. It took 2 hours to break in. Behind it was a chamber. Circular. Reinforced with steel. Lit by a single bulb hanging from a chain. The walls were covered in hundreds of symbols etched with bone. No writing. Just drawings. But in the center, on the floor, was a mattress. And Caleb's shoe. Melissa was sedated when they told her. They didn't tell her everything, not yet. But Scott demanded to go inside. Meeks allowed it. She knew they had to treat this like a hostage situation now, not a missing child. Scott entered the chamber with 2 agents. He dropped to his knees beside the shoe. Cried. Touched the mattress. That's when he noticed it. A tiny door in the wall. 2 feet tall. Nailed shut. They pried it open. Inside was a box. Carved wood. Burned symbols. A latch fashioned from a doll's leg. They opened it. Inside. Strips of Caleb's pajama shirt. Human teeth child-sized. A Polaroid of Daniel Carver. And something wrapped in cloth. Scott unwrapped it. It was a cassette player with 1 tape inside. The label was handwritten, "Play Me, Daddy." They brought it to the station and played it. The tape began with static. Then a child's laugh. Then Daniel's voice sobbing. "I didn't take him. She did. She makes me stay. She makes me watch. I didn't want this." Then another voice. "Emily. Sweet. Soft. He lies to you, Daddy. He hurts little boys. He's been here the whole time." Then silence. And then Caleb's voice cracked, faint. "Daddy, help." The tape ended. Meeks issued a full house demolition order. They weren't just going to investigate anymore, they were going to open every wall. But before the first hammer struck, something happened. At 3:33 a.m. all the lights in the house turned on. No power. The phones in the patrol cars on the street began to ring. Every single one. When officers answered, all they heard was a whisper. "Don't open the walls. Or he dies." The order was put on hold. They didn't know how she was doing it or from where. But Emily was watching. She was in control. And somewhere in the rotting arteries of that house, Caleb was still alive. And not alone. It's not a house. It's a hive. Special Agent Thomas Kearney, FBI Field Report, December 8, 2003. No more theories. No more waiting. After the tapes, the drawings, the basement chamber, and the phone calls, the FBI authorized a full tactical sweep of the Rupp property. Not to arrest, but to rescue. They were no longer looking for just Caleb Rupp. They were hunting Emily Reese. A woman presumed dead for 22 years. A woman who had become something else, something inhuman. December 8, 2003, 10:12 p.m. Operation Black Hollow begins. A team of 7 enters the house. No lights. No power. Each agent wears a body cam and carries 2 hours of oxygen. Their entry point, the metal chamber in the basement, now believed to be an access node to something far larger. It's not just crawl spaces anymore. Behind the chamber wall was a hidden tunnel, brick-lined, hand-carved, descending even deeper. It curved like a spiral. The deeper they went, the colder it got. The temperature dropped to 41 degrees Fahrenheit. At the bottom was a door made of rusted iron. Etched into it, the same symbol found on the drawings in the attic, an eye with 2 vertical slashes beneath it. They opened the door. What they saw didn't make sense. A hallway, 10 feet high, reinforced, with rooms on either side, some with beds, some with cages, all lined with hand-carved drawings. Some rooms had mirrors on the ceilings. Some had makeshift ventilation. And some had toys. Not modern toys, decades old. Rusted. Moldy. Dolls with their faces removed. A rocking horse covered in dark stains. Agent Kearney said it best. This wasn't a lair. It was a system. Designed to raise something. Or train something. Or feed something. They moved deeper. Every wall whispered. Literally. The ventilation system carried sound from one room to another. Whispers echoed through pipes. Laughter. Crying. Voices. Impossible to tell what was real. 11:06 p.m. Agent Trask spotted movement. A small figure no taller than a child darting across the hallway up ahead. The team gave chase, weapons ready. They turned a corner and froze. On the wall, a message freshly written in red. "He's mine now." Then the lights cut out. And the screaming began. Above ground, Meeks and Melissa waited in a command van, watching the live body cam feeds. 4 of them went black instantly. 2 showed only static. Only Agent Kearney's camera remained. He was separated from the others, breathing heavy, alone in what looked like a storage room. And then he heard it. A knock. 3 slow taps. He raised his weapon, turned toward the sound, and there, in the corner, Caleb. Pale, filthy, alive. Caleb? Kearney whispered. The boy nodded, but said nothing. Kearney approached slowly, checked for injuries, tried to radio out. Nothing. He took Caleb by the hand and started retracing his path. The hollow was shifting. Doors that were open were now closed. Corridors had rearranged. It wasn't just a maze, it was alive, and it didn't want them to leave. Meanwhile, above, something else happened. Melissa received a text message from her own phone number. It simply read, "Come home. He's safe." She broke, ran out of the van. Before anyone could stop her, she was inside the house. The moment she crossed the threshold, the front door slammed shut behind her. The lights flickered. The house was alive again. Back underground, Kearney and Caleb made it to the stairwell only to find it collapsed. Then Caleb whispered, "She knows you're here." Kearney turned. Caleb's eyes weren't blinking. He was smiling too wide. Then he pointed behind Kearney. There, in the dark, a silhouette. A woman. Hair matted. Face pale. Wearing what looked like a hospital gown. But her limbs were too long. Her head tilted too far. And her fingers dragged along the wall like claws. "Emily." She didn't speak. She just stared. Then she whispered, not from her mouth, but from the pipes above them. "He's not yours. He's mine. You took my family. So I made my own." Kearney opened fire. The bullets passed through her, hitting only air. Then the lights exploded. Static swallowed the screen. The final image from his body cam? Caleb standing beside Emily, smiling. Some people get buried by trauma. Others plant roots in it. Dr. Carol Wenham, forensic psychologist. December 9th, 2003, 12:21 a.m. Melissa Rupp was inside. The house greeted her like a heartbeat. Everything pulsed. The floorboards groaned beneath her. The walls exhaled. The air was wrong, stale and damp, like breath from a throat that hadn't opened in years. "Caleb," she called out. No answer. Then the lights flickered, and she heard it. Laughter. Not Caleb's. Children. Dozens of them. Faint. Echoing. She moved toward the sound, past the destroyed living room, down the hall lined with Caleb's old crayon drawings. Except, these weren't his. These were new. Drawn by someone else. They showed her. Melissa. Walking through the house. Crying. Kneeling beside a child. She turned the corner and stopped. The hallway ahead was filled with drawings. All of her. Some showed her screaming. Some showed her tied to a chair. Others showed her lying in a crib with Emily standing over her smiling. And all of them were captioned the same way. Mommy. Below ground, in the hollow, Kearney's signal returned for a flash, enough to show the team he was moving. The image flickered, then stabilized. He was walking with Caleb again, but the boy looked different. Detached. Like he wasn't fully there. And Kearney wasn't speaking. He was humming. The same tune Melissa used to sing to Caleb before bed. A lullaby. One she hadn't sung since he went missing. She whispered it to herself. The mic picked it up. Down below, Caleb turned suddenly toward the camera. He heard her. He remembered. And in that moment, his eyes changed. He blinked. Inside the house, Melissa followed the sound of humming. It came from the basement, now cracked open and dripping with moisture. She descended the stairs. Halfway down, the walls began to breathe. She put her hand on the concrete, it pulsed. Then she stepped into the chamber. It wasn't empty. There were children. At least 6 of them. Lined up along the walls. Some were older. Some barely toddlers. Their skin pale. Eyes blank. Each had their lips sewn shut with black thread. One reached for her weakly. Then a voice. "Do you like them?" Melissa turned. Emily stood in the center of the room. Still in her hospital gown, but no longer hiding. Her face was thin, almost skeletal. But her eyes burned with clarity, not madness. Purpose. "I made them for you," Emily said. "You were such a good mother. I thought you deserved more." Melissa stepped back. "Where's Caleb?" she asked. Emily cocked her head. "He's part of the family now. Just like Daniel. Just like the others. You don't have to be alone anymore. None of us do." Then she smiled. And it was wrong. Not because of the expression, but because her mouth never moved. The walls did. The pipes. The beams. The structure itself spoke for her. "I built something better," she said. "Out of what they left behind. We don't lose anyone here. We keep them." Melissa ran. She didn't make it far. The hallway shifted behind her, walls moving like puzzle pieces. She turned left, then right, only to find herself back in Caleb's bedroom. Except the bed was gone. In its place was a crib. Inside it, a doll made of hair, its face stitched to resemble her own. Melissa screamed. Then the floor beneath her collapsed. She fell through darkness, landing hard on concrete somewhere in the lowest part of the hollow. Everything was silent, until she heard it. Breathing. Not one person. Many. She crawled forward, flashlight shaking. Then the beam caught it. A wall, lined with mirrors, and in each reflection she saw a different version of herself. Crying, screaming, smiling, rotted, mummified. Some had missing eyes. Others had stitched mouths. Behind them stood Emily. In every single one. "She's trying to replace me," Melissa whispered. Then she saw him. Caleb, huddled in the far corner, still breathing, his eyes glassy. Melissa rushed over, pulled him into her arms. He was cold, barely conscious, but he whispered faintly, "Don't listen to her. She's not real." Melissa turned. Emily stood in the doorway. "She's not my mother," Caleb whispered again. "She's a copy. She steals people and makes them stay." Emily's face changed, twisted. The skin seemed to ripple. And then Melissa understood. Emily wasn't human anymore. She was something else. Something that had fed on loneliness, trauma, abandonment, and turned it into control. Into the hollow. Melissa ran again, this time dragging Caleb with her. But the walls shifted, closed. The exits vanished. Then her phone rang. It was her number again. One word on the screen. "Forever." She answered. Emily's voice came through, distorted and ancient. "If you leave, he dies. If you stay, you become." Then silence. Then Caleb's voice whispered through the receiver. "Don't become." And the phone caught fire in her hand. "The deeper you go, the less you remember what outside felt like." Recovered note from Daniel Carver's crawlspace. December 9th, 2003, 2:01 a.m. The hollow was burning. Not with fire, but with chaos. Something had broken the rules. Melissa wasn't supposed to find Caleb. She wasn't supposed to resist. And now the hollow, the living, breathing maze built by Emily was collapsing in on itself. Walls that once whispered now screamed. Pipes hissed and cracked. The oxygen felt thinner with every step. Melissa carried Caleb through the dark, slipping between chambers that twisted and reformed behind her. Caleb was weak, fading in and out of consciousness. "We're almost out," she whispered. But she knew that was a lie. Elsewhere in the hollow, FBI agent Thomas Kearney was still alive. His body cam was dark, but he was recording audio through a backup transmitter. He was in a room that hadn't been found before. A library. Of sorts. Books. Journals. All handwritten. Bound in cloth. Many covered in blood. He opened one. Inside, Daniel Carver's confessions. "She found me after the fire. I was dying. She fed me from the walls. Gave me names. Gave me power. But it was a trade. I belong to her now. I am not the monster. I am the proof monsters can be made." Page after page, Daniel described what Emily had become. Not a girl. Not even a woman. But an idea that grew claws. A grief so powerful it burrowed into walls and rewrote reality around it. Emily had been dead for years. But her mind, her rage, survived in the house. She had become part of the structure. And Daniel, trapped in his guilt, had served her. Until he stopped. The final entry. "I gave her the last boy. I won't give her another. I've made a door. I'll leave it unlocked just once. Let the mother find it. Let her end this. If she can." Back above, the FBI lost full contact. Every radio failed. Every feed dropped. Then at 2:33 a.m. the Rupp house lit up. A pulse of light, like heat lightning, rippled through the structure. And then, silence. Inside the hollow, Melissa reached a forked hallway. Her arms ached. Caleb was heavy. She could barely see. Then, a light flickered on. A door ahead. Old. Splintered. A symbol carved into the center, the eye with two vertical slashes. Daniel's mark. She kicked it open. A tunnel. At the end of it, stairs. Real stairs. She climbed, shaking every step harder than the last. Caleb whispered, barely audible. "Mommy, she's coming." Melissa turned. And there, rising from the floor, was Emily. Her body disjointed, moving in frames like broken film. She no longer resembled a person. She was walls. Nails. Bone. Her voice came from everywhere. "Leave him and you live." Melissa held Caleb tighter. "Stay and you both become." Then the walls shuddered. Pipes cracked. Something began pulling at her legs, hands coming from the floor. Caleb reached into her jacket and pulled out something. The cassette player. Still intact. He hit play. The tape from earlier played again. He's not yours. He's mine. You took my family. So I made my own. But this time, the voice that followed wasn't Caleb's. It was Daniel's. Emily. I'm done. I'm not afraid of you anymore. The walls shrieked. Emily howled. The ground split beneath her. Flames, not fire, but light, poured out, swallowing her image whole. And then, silence. Melissa blinked. She was at the top of the stairs. In the Rupp's front hallway. Still holding Caleb. Behind her, the door slammed shut. And vanished. 2:44 a.m. The house went still. Melissa collapsed. Caleb clung to her. They didn't speak. Outside, sirens wailed. She walked out barefoot into the snow, Caleb in her arms. The house behind her made one final sound. Tap, 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 and then it stopped. Back inside, deep beneath the floorboards, in a part of the hollow no one had reached. A mirror cracked, and in its reflection, Daniel, smiling, fading into the wall. It didn't start with Emily. It started with the house. FBI case memo sealed December 2003. December 10th, 2003, 4:14 a.m. Melissa Rupp and Caleb were taken directly to Eastern Maine Medical Center. No press. No statements. No visitors. He was alive. Malnourished. Scarred. But alive. Melissa stayed with him, never letting go of his hand. He didn't speak for hours. When he finally did, it was just 3 words. She's still here. The Rupp house was sealed. The FBI classified the interior findings. Every entry point was welded shut. A crew prepared to demolish the entire structure within 72 hours. But things didn't go as planned. 2 members of the crew went missing before the bulldozers ever arrived. They were later found locked inside the attic. No memory of how they got there. On the wall beside them, fresh scratches. She moved. Melissa tried to leave Bangor. She booked a flight. Packed nothing. Just to Caleb and walked. But at the airport, as she passed through security, something happened. Her bag triggered the alarm. Inside, though she swore she didn't pack it, was a cassette tape. Labeled The First Brick. She froze. Caleb began to cry. They left the airport without boarding the flight. That night, back at the safe house, Melissa played the tape. The First Brick. The voice on the tape wasn't Emily's. Or Daniel's. It was a woman's. Older. Refined. You think this started with a girl? With a boy in a wall? No. The hollow has always been here. Before Caleb. Before Daniel. Before me. She didn't say her name. But she told her story. About a house on Hollow Street built in 1913 by a man named Reuben Pike, a stonemason who lost his wife and child in a coal fire. He built the house as a memorial. A shrine. But he didn't build it for the living. He built it for them. He slept in the basement. Ate nothing. Died within a year. But neighbors said the house began to change after that. Doors moved. Whispers echoed. Children heard voices behind their walls. And over the decades, others moved in. Each person who lived there left something behind. Guilt, trauma, rage, and the house absorbed it. Emily wasn't the beginning. She was just the first one to listen. She didn't build the hollow. She just gave it a name. Melissa shut the tape off. That night, she had a dream. She was inside the Rupp house again. But this time, it was different. The walls were made of mirrors. Every reflection showed someone she'd never met. A boy crying in the 1950s. A woman clutching a dead infant in the 1940s. A man hammering nails into a wall, muttering the same phrase over and over. It's the only way to stay. She turned and saw Emily behind her. But not the creature. A little girl. Hair in braids. Eyes wide. She held Melissa's hand. And whispered, "She's not me anymore." Melissa woke up screaming. Meanwhile, Caleb began to draw again. But not monsters. Blueprints. Of a house. The same one. Over and over. Sometimes it was upside down. Sometimes it was missing a roof. But always it was the Rupp house. But different. More rooms. More levels. More people inside. Melissa asked him what he was drawing. Caleb looked up calm. She's building again. December 12th, 2003, 2:03 a.m. The Rupp house burned to the ground. No one knew how. There was no power. No gas. No flammable materials. But when investigators combed the ruins the next morning, they found something strange in the ash. Not bones. Not wiring. But bricks. Pale gray. smooth, and on each one carved deeply. A name: Caleb's, Daniel's, Emily's, Melissa's, and hundreds of others. Some were still warm. The FBI sealed the case, called it delusion, panic, shared psychosis. But Meeks quit the force 3 days later. Her last report ended with this line: "You can tear the house down, but you can't kill a foundation. She'll find another place. She always does." That night, in a city 200 miles away, a family moved into a fixer-upper colonial with ivy-covered bricks. The daughter, age 7, was quiet, pale, artistic. Her first words as she stood in the living room: "Mommy, this house remembers. The hollow doesn't need a house. It just needs a crack." Anonymous submission to FBI tip line, January 2004. January 3, 2004. 3 weeks had passed since the Rupp house burned. Melissa and Caleb had relocated again, this time to a safe house in upstate New York. No windows, no phones, off-grid. Caleb was in therapy. Melissa hadn't spoken to anyone outside law enforcement since the fire, but strange things had already started happening. Scratches on the bathroom wall, faint humming through the floor vents. And one night, Caleb came to Melissa's bedside with a question. "If the house is gone, where did she go?" Melissa didn't answer. She couldn't, because deep down she feared she already knew. Meanwhile, in Bangor, the ashes of the Rupp house were hauled away, but 3 bricks were missing. No one noticed except Detective Meeks, who, even off the force, kept her own files. She'd been tracking an anonymous tip, someone claiming to be a survivor. The person never gave a name, only coordinates. To a farmhouse, long abandoned, hours from town. Inside, Meeks found a single object. A wall mirror, 7 feet tall, framed in blackwood, etched along the top. "Speak and she hears you." She never touched it. She turned and left. But in the final seconds of the cam footage she recorded, something moved behind her reflection. Back in New York, Melissa received a package. No postage. Inside, a photo of Caleb sleeping, a Polaroid of the new house they were hiding in, and a single brick. Gray, smooth, etched into it, a symbol. The eye. Melissa dropped it. It shattered, and from inside poured dirt. Not soil, damp, rotted basement earth. She screamed. That night, Caleb spoke again in his sleep, and the voice wasn't his. It was hers. "Home is wherever I am." The next morning, the wall beside their bed had changed. The drywall was bulging. Melissa pressed her hand against it. It felt warm. And then 3 knocks. Tap, tap, tap. She backed away. That night, she wrote a letter to the FBI. It was never sent, but the last line read, "We didn't escape. We just carried her with us." 2 years later, 2006. A family in Minnesota was found dead inside their home. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. The house was new, less than a year old. But in the walls, behind the insulation, police found rooms. Tiny ones. Hand-built. Hammered shut from the inside. Inside one, a doll made of hair. On the walls, drawings of a boy named Caleb. And one phrase carved over and over. "She never left." They say the hollow was destroyed, that the fire ended it. But every so often, a family moves into a new house, and their child says something strange. Something like, "There's a girl in the walls." Or, "The house talks when you sleep." Or the worst one, "It's not my house anymore. It's hers." So if you hear knocking behind your walls, or find a drawing that no one admits to making, or if your child starts humming a lullaby you never taught them, don't ignore it. Don't stay. Because the hollow doesn't live in a house. It lives in people. And it's always looking for a way back in.